Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a game you might not have seen before. This was not a title that ever got a huge amount of press attention back in the day. It isn't, to be honest, a very good game. It's a game I would describe as a game of almosts. It's almost a really interesting look at a historical bunch of settings. It's almost a good first-person shooter. It's almost a good example of an indie game that performed ambitiously and got it right. But it isn't any of those things. But it's still a game I have a certain amount of fondness for, as we'll see. This is Darkest of Days, and some of you may not know this if you don't know me personally. I'm a historian. I have a master's degree in American history, but I have all sorts of historical interests. And this was a game that piqued a lot of mine because it touches on a few areas of history which I don't think have been really very well explored by games. We'll see in a moment. So we're into what is a very unfortunate episode of history. If you aren't familiar with the Battle of the Little Bighorn, well, you probably haven't studied much American history, and it was one of the rare occasions in which U.S. cavalrymen were horribly slaughtered by Native Americans, and given the situation which the Native Americans found themselves in by the mid-1870s, it was it's not a situation where it's easy to feel terribly sorry for the cavalrymen, to be honest. But anyway, we're into combat, and this is your fairly standard late 2000s control layout. Now, you'll see that operating weapons from that period using modern shooters is not exactly a brilliant way to ensure accuracy or a high kill count, but that isn't really the point of Darkest of Days. It almost revels in giving you outdated hardware and having you experience what it was actually like to be fighting like this in at the time. This is a relatively accurate representation of what happened, I'm led to believe, although it's far closer range. So we have this hilarious representation of me having been shot in the crotch, and it seems that the 3D model of my my legs with an arrow embedded in me is a separate object from the player model, who I think appears to have just been lodged in the ground, unable to move, because despite having been shot and really badly wounded, I'm still perfectly accurately loading and firing this pistol. But if you know the Battle of the Little Bighorn, you'll know that this doesn't. There's no way to win this. This is one of those supposed to lose fights that games like to introduce their stories with. Curiously, nobody seems to be finishing me off, and I would note with some slight discomfort that all the Native American models seem to be have exactly the same haircut, to be almost exactly the same person, which I'm going to put down to a level of lack of budget for this game rather than ingrained racism, but you interpret that as you will. So there's General Custer famously going down, and yeah, I don't think this did happen in real life. You gotta go now. So, as you may have gathered, all is not entirely as it seems. We are not actually a cavalryman dying on the Little Bighorn.
Subject, Alexander Torres. 35 to 40 years old. No known family. Active service with 7th Cavalry. Presumed deceased. Body not recovered. Preliminary set of allegations.
So we find ourselves in this slightly half-lifey environment. where we are being scanned and where our injuries are being dealt with. This is the part of the game which is where it really falls down, because this is the bridging narrative where you're set in the future. You are being sent back and forth through time, and to be honest, it's not great.
You are indeed back among the living. Please come up here so I may tell you about your future in service of history.
So you'll see here we're in this slightly curious lab. We've got a bunch of historical weapons here that are not of this time, which is seemingly quite futuristic. This is about the most we'll see of the future world, to be honest. This curiously ornate door is here with a mysterious white light shining from under it. Now, I'm not sure whether that's deliberate as a visual effect or whether they just didn't render anything outside this room. I choose to believe it's the former, but that might be giving them too much of the benefit of the doubt.
You are in the future from your perspective, around 300 years or so, if you're curious. We are Chronotech, and through the research and efforts of our founder, Dr. Ranier Cole, we have...
Could you sit a little bit further back from the camera, love?
It's a recent innovation. Dr. Cole took his first trip 20 years ago, and we are very careful in our travels. We use it only for research. But what a fantastic gift. The mysteries alone we've solved. Chronotech travelers witnessed monoliths being raised at Stonehenge. Another team discovered why the Mayan civilization disappeared. We've discovered and learned so much. But with the power of time travel comes the responsibility of protecting history. Dr. Cole is a fanatic about this. It's one of the reasons we call him the Father of Time.
I don't mean to laugh, but he is a very potato-headed gentleman, isn't he?
The goals of discovery and protecting history form the prime objective of Chronotech. Keeping that in mind, there have been some very disquieting developments. First, Dr. Cole is missing. I fear the very Father of Time is lost somewhere, sometime out there. Second, we are identifying certain historical events out of place and certain people being put suddenly in harm's way. We discover new anomalies every day and we can't find the cause or connection. I can explain neither Dr. Cole's absence nor the changes we've been seeing, but I have a strong hunch they're related somehow. That's where you come in, Alexander Morris. You will be sent to different places in their times of great strife and change, charged with saving those people facing an untimely end. You are the perfect candidate to help our cause, and I'm sure you'd like to show your gratitude for being rescued from certain death. There's more you need to know, and you must have some questions. For the answers, step into the portal and meet the man who will help you along in your quests. Agent Dexter.
So you'll have noticed a couple of things there which might be a bit of a red flag. Firstly, that was a cutscene that consisted entirely of someone talking at me through a screen. That, in terms of the future bridging narrative, is something you'll have to get used to. Secondly, you'll have noticed that the subtitle slightly got away from me there. It is not a game that is overly precious about getting the specifics right on some of these smaller details. Now, of course, those don't matter for the enjoyment of a game in the overall sense, but they're something that kind of distracts if you're trying to make a really polished game. So let's step into the portal and see what 2009's technology has to offer us.
I guess you're the fucking new guy, huh? Now, you got some work to do, and I think you should start with some weapons training. Things are a bit different these days.
So here we are in the tutorial. I think we're still in the future here. From the streetlights, I assume as much. The narrative about us traveling to different time periods and rescuing people who are in harm's way. Now, that's something that's never really borne out by the game's reality as much as its ambition. There are more like 3 time zones you'll travel to, but it's interesting nonetheless. So let's step forward and do our weapons training.
Pistol. Depending on when you're headed, you'll be issued the right guns for that time. You can only carry 2 guns at a time, but you can pick up any gun you might find. See if you can sight in that old boy.
Apparently not. This has a very strange reloading mechanic where you can get a faster reload by hitting the left mouse button at the exact right point during the reload circle.
It flashes green. If you miss it, your weapon jams up and it takes even longer.
Oh yes, grenades. So having shot some Jam Germans, let's proceed to the grenade throwing
Standard issue
round.
stick grenades. Just aim and let them fly. Toss a couple out there and see if you can take out old Hans.
There's no particular aiming mechanism. You'll see you just tap the button and you fling the grenades absurdly far.
Like a big
Uh,
firecracker.
Not exactly using a particularly good overhand throw, so it's a slightly strange mechanism. They do sort of just seem to fly wherever your mouse cursor is pointing.
Remember, they can throw them at you too.
You can also lob them absurdly
All right,
quickly.
son. I think you figured out them grenades.
Can I hit him? Apparently he is grenade proof. But I'm not. This is a game that was released in the aftermath of Modern Warfare's massive popularity, so you heal off damage very quickly and have two weapons on your inventory at any one time, plus a grenade.
Trajectory to dial into range. Be patient and plan ahead. You can't swing this thing around like a 20 gauge.
Well, he says that, but this is actually very easy to do in a way that, you know, I do think cannons like this tended to need reloading. The artillery sections are pretty much universally the worst part of this game, but they are an unavoidable fact of life.
All right, let's get you checked out on the map system. Bring up your map and take a look. The icon indicates your location. The circles are your objectives. Enemy locations, when we know where they are marked in red.
This does have the rather nice touch that you do actually get a physical map that you carry around, which I quite like.
First of all, there are certain people that need to survive. They'll be surrounded by a blue aura. If you kill them, it knocks the time stream all cattywampus. That brings all sorts of unwanted attention, and it'll get you killed faster than shit through a goose. To neutralize them, aim for the legs, shoot for their shoulders. Just don't kill them. There's another way to take out the blue aura enemies. A new experimental weapon called chasers. Unleash these glowing little gremlins and they'll seek out enemies with blue auras, knocking them unconscious and taking them out of the battle while keeping them alive.
So we get a handful of Pokeballs that we can chuck at enemies who need to be kept alive for weird historical reasons. It's a rather strange mechanic that I never particularly liked. It kind of just got in the way of combat, if I was honest, and it never seemed to play much actual role in the plot.
Stay in line, follow officers' orders, and keep your head down. Get ready for war, son.
But now that we've done the training, it's time for our first mission.
Welcome back, Morris. Dexter, I'm assuming your training session went well?
Yes, ma'am. I ran his rear through the gear and he seems to be gripping gravel.
Very well. After consulting with the Chronotech time stream monitors, I've isolated two individuals in immediate danger. Joseph Welsh is a soldier in the Union Army in the United States Civil War. He's supposed to be away from the action, working as a supply clerk, but he's suddenly been moved to the front lines. Our other target is Captain Petrovich, a Russian officer in World War I. He and his troops should stay together through the war, but they're now in the path of a crushing German counterattack at Tannenberg. If either Welsh or Petrovich meets an untimely end, the repercussions could be far-reaching.
So now we get into the bit of this game that I actually quite liked. This explores bits of history that I never really saw explored in games before. There have been very few US Civil War games, particularly from a first-person perspective. And the First World War, I mean, really is quite lacking in a lot of games. There's a couple of strategy games. There's World War Zero, which was a FPS on the PS2, which hardly counts. And I think we should start by checking out the First World War, particularly the Eastern Front, which again is one that never really gets brought up.
The opening days of World War I at Tannenberg. You're in the Second Russian Army, which has three big problems. Number one, First Russian Army General Renkamp wouldn't piss on Second Army General Samsonov if he was on fire. He's hung the Second Army out to dry just because he hates Samsonov. Number two, both of these dumb shit generals have been broadcasting their orders on the radio, unencoded. Number three, the Germans know all this, and they're set to kick Russian ass. Hell, after this one, Russia doesn't march on German soil again until 1945. The Second Army is destroyed, Over 125,000 Russian troops are lost. Somehow, Petrovich has been moved to the Second Army. We know he made it out of Tannenberg, but about 100,000 Germans are breathing down his neck. We're gonna get you close, just south of the town, but it's gonna be a fucking mess out there, which means it's gonna be a pain in the ass to find Petrovich. I'll be there to help you track him. Look for me when you get there.
And you know what? All of that's really accurate. They really did invade German territory at Tannenberg. They really did have unencoded orders, and the generals really did not get along and couldn't work together, and that was part of the reason the battle went so badly for the Russians. There's a lot of effort. There's a lot of weird detail and effort put into this game at strange points where basic elements of gameplay and game design were not adhered to. It's a very strange mix of good and bad, and that's why I find this game so fascinating. Anyway, let's look at our map and proceed to the front. So it's the First World War, so things are not going well. Now this trench line is perhaps a little bit inaccurate. This is more reminiscent of the Western Front trench lines than the slightly more mobile warfare of the Eastern Front. But nonetheless, it's a little bit of artistic license for the purposes of storytelling and making life easier for the player than just getting cut down by machine guns. So I think we can forgive it. Also, needless to say, most World War I combat did not take place at this close quarters. Take out that machine gunner, make life a bit easier for our fellow troops, and we'll proceed to find Captain Petrovich.
He's pinned down. Get your ass on that gun and provide cover fire.
Yep, so we have our very first fixed position section, but this is on a machine gun, so things are relatively easy. We have a little heat meter at the bottom. This is one of those fixed guns in video games that seems to have no ammunition nor need a loader, but we can forgive that. These uniforms are reasonably accurate. They're still wearing the pointed helmets of the early war, because this is 1914, so they haven't gone over to the classic German helmet that we know and love from all those World War II movies yet. For a fixed turret section, this isn't actually throwing very many enemies at me at this stage, but it does quite well demonstrate the folly that was early First World War combat with just throwing infantry troops up against machine guns. So as you'll see, there's Petrovich with his orange aura, and we've got to keep him alive. This isn't too difficult a task, frankly. This is only the first level. So let's take another look at our map. Okay, we've got a fair way to run.
That's the only way you could have made it. Keep going.
Thanks, Mr. Redneck. Oh yeah, we just saw the orange aura. So these are quite large environments. Now they're relatively undetailed. They've just got a few trees and some paths. But for a 2009 game, a little bit of open roaming in a first-person shooter was quite innovative, and something I quite appreciated. I'm not sure if everyone running that way means I'm going the wrong direction, but it looks like I'm doing okay. Oh yeah, here we are. So for some reason we have a German rifle and a Russian rifle, which is not entirely what I was expecting, but I'll head up the hill and meet our man. So your man from the cavalry does not appear to be particularly phased by having to fight 40 years in the future and using a weapon he's never handled before, because you are actually quite handy with a bolt-action rifle. I've no idea how accurate the Russian and German in this game is. I don't speak either language, so if someone from the comments wants to tell me how well or badly the team did translating this, I'd be interested to hear. Also, from my understanding of the Battle of Tannenberg, this is a ridiculously generous amount of ammunition that the Russian troops have to use at this stage. A lot of them were fighting without proper weapons, even at this point, and the Russian army was never really not in a massive state, to be honest. This is not a brilliant animation, let's be honest. This man appears to be just leaning on his gun and hoping that it hits the enemy. So we do have a bayonet attack. The animation is terrible. But if you hit the F button, you will jab people with your pointy thing. Just going to hide back here till my health grows back. You'd have thought there'd be far less casualties in the First World War if they just thought to stop and hide for a minute to let their limbs regrow. So the combat in this game is a bit of a mixed bag. It's quite exciting and fast-paced, but it has the problem that often the sequences go on far too long, and the fact that you're using these historical weapons that bluntly aren't much good really does slow things down an awful lot.
They turned tail. Nice shooting. When you weren't running.
Okay, we run into our first inaccuracy of the game because they definitely did not have mustard gas on at this point in the war. That was a later invention, 1915-16. I think it was first used in 1915 against the French, so not against the Russians at the Battle of Tannenberg. Now, of course, we are dealing with a universe in which the flow of time has been interrupted and there's shenanigans afoot, so you can forgive a couple of things, but it's not entirely accurate. Now, of course, the gas mask just makes fighting incredibly awkward, although for some reason the Germans are fighting without gas masks and seem to be impervious to their own gas, because apparently they have friendly fire turned off in this war. I'm going to grab a pistol because they're far easier to use at short range. I see you hiding inside that tree, so I think we're heading roughly in the right direction, even though I can barely see. I don't know how to remove this mask either. I assume it'll come off automatically when I'm free of the gas. Ah yes, here we go.
Catch up with them, we need to head this way. See that? Auras. Remember, those guys are supposed to survive.
Alright, so we run into our first enemy troops that are not allowed to kill, so we have to shoot them in the leg and take them out with that kind of injury. That means they won't actually hopefully get taken home and survive the war. Now, I could have used my little capture balls, but I can't actually remember how to use those. Oh yes, it's up on the middle mouse. Now, you'd think if you were a German soldier at this point and you saw someone flinging weird shit at you, you might have pause for thought about that and take immediate action to stop me, but apparently it worked fine and I captured that guy without any difficulty. It's so dark in here, I almost didn't realise they were Germans. Oh, we got a one that needs to survive there. There we go. Right, we've cleared out that ambush, so let's continue down the path. Hopefully some of our Russian friends will come with us. That's by no means guaranteed if you know the record of desertion in the Russian army during the First World War.
Now, let's get after that Petrovich fella.
So I think we might be able to sneak down here, although there's a fair chance I might die of full damage. Oh no, there's an invisible wall because this is a slightly shoddily made game. What's this? History. Game. What's that doing there? Those don't come about for another 2 years. You know that. Die. Get out of here. You're causing an anachronism. Also, these are British tanks. The Germans only made a handful of them, and they're not these ones. I mean, they did steal some from the British, but the British would have had to invent them first. Yeah, that's right. Stay away. Nobody likes you. Right, so we've actually got to get away from the tanks and head over here, have we?
That mill looks like a headquarters type place. Let's take a look.
Does it? Looks like a mill to me.
Close. Let's get up closer to the action.
You Germans or Russians? Okay, you're Russians, that's fine. I don't have to shoot you in the brain. Here we have history's most Russian-looking man.
Just nod and smile. Come on outside and I'll tell you what he said.
You could just tell me here. You've already spoken in English. He knows you're not Russian.
All right. What he was saying was that this whole area is pretty much overrun, and he's sending all troops on to Frankenau. Now, that sounds like our next destination, but I want to head back to the Chronotech labs and do some planning. Come on, let's blow this pop stand.
Right, well, assuming that we can get out of here, this might be a good opportunity to wind things up as we head back to the lab and pursue our next mission. We will do that in the following episode. But first, let's have a look at what Dexter and the strange Australian woman on the screen have to say.
I've received Dexter's report. It sounds like all hell was breaking loose back there. Good job getting Petrovich off the battlefield. It was bad luck you couldn't catch up with him. Our research shows a location just outside Frankenau is the best rendezvous point for Petrovich. And don't forget about Welsh in the Civil War. Remember, maintaining the integrity of history is our mission at Chronotech.
Your job will be a lot easier if your shooting irons are in better shape. Our team is working on improving period weapons, but they're also running interference for you. Remember the people with the blue auras? The fewer of them you kill, the more time our team has to work on your weapon systems, and the less time they spend cleaning up after your worthless ass.
That's a hell of an excuse plot, but I'll take it as an excuse for a upgrade mechanic.
After every mission, assuming you don't totally screw it up, you'll get upgrade points. You can use these points to get more ammo in a clip, faster rate of fire, better accuracy. You get the idea. Once you use them, though, you can't get them back. So choose carefully.
Honestly, I never found these made much difference, and we only get 3 points in this mission anyway, so it's difficult to know exactly how useful they are. I would say that rate of fire is a useful investment, just because, especially in the Civil War missions, you're dealing with firearms that are very, very slow to fire, and it's not very effective as a weapon. Now, obviously, that's historically accurate, but it's also not much fun as a game mechanic. So I'm going to put 2 points into that first level of rate of fire. You don't get many upgrades, as you can see, but it adds a little bit of an RPG mechanic to the game, which I suppose gives it some kind of additional value.
I think when this is all over, I'm asking Mother if she'll let me go camping back in dinosaur times. Maybe take me down a Stegosaurus and cook it over a big old campfire.
You're a time traveler from the 22nd century. How are you so much of an idiot, Dexter? Anyway, before we proceed to our next mission, I'm going to save here. I'm going to leave it off for the day. Thanks again for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at a lesser-known time travel game, one that I have a certain fondness for despite its many obvious flaws. Let me know if you'd like to see more of it. I might come back for a few more episodes down the line. But for now, my next episode is going to be another edition of Resident Evil 4 that's coming up this weekend, so I hope you look forward to that. Thanks very much for joining me. Let me know if you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.